if you're happy to take the floor. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that warm introduction, Ollie, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. So as Ollie said, we're going to be talking to you about our social network analysis tool and how that's been helping us to understand the people, groups and organisations that we've been working with within our complex system in Doncaster. I'm also joined by Sarah Leonardi, who is Associate Director of CFE Research, and she'll be talking to you a bit more about the technical elements of the tool and how that works from an evaluation perspective. Next slide, please, Joe. And Dr. Joe Welford will be our Chris Whitty moving us on with the slides. So just to introduce the session and just to kind of talk a bit about to what we'll be covering today, I've already introduced the team. My role in this will be kind of giving you the context around the tool and the questions that the tool is helping us to answer in terms of our broader Get Doncaster Moving ambitions. And as I said, Sarah will be covering the more specific elements of the SNA tool, how we've used it, and then touching on kind of what that's helped us to learn. And then we're wrapping up at the end with some breakout sessions to give you guys an opportunity to reflect on what you've heard and discuss in some small groups. And there will be an opportunity for question and answers at the end. So as Ollie said, please pop any questions that come into your head in the chat, and we'll come to those at the end. Next slide, please, Joe. So a bit about Doncaster's ambitions, just to help set the scene. So our vision is healthy and vibrant communities through movement, physical activity and sport. And that's been our vision since 2017, when we first wrote our new, at the time, physical activity and sport strategy. Recently been refreshed back in September, where we kind of reorganised our thoughts, used our learning from our local delivery pilot, and recognise the role that we're playing within Doncaster's wider ambitions across our strategic partnership in Doncaster, which is known as Team Doncaster. And you can see the 8 strategic ambitions for our place around the outside of the diagram that you can see with the colourful icons there. And we recognise that at the heart of that, movement, physical activity and sport has got a great contribution to make towards those ambitions, but also those ambitions have a role to play in contributing to our own Get Doncaster Moving vision. And we believe through taking action in those 8 policy areas that you can see in the white boxes, in those kind of 8 themes or 8 sub-ambitions, will enable us to contribute more widely. You'll recognise many of those from either your own strategies, through the World Health Organization work, or the 8 investments. And those have been designed and refined based on international evidence, as well as our local evidence around our own kind of understanding our own system. And you can see that they're situated within some purple and green rings. And those rings represent the different levels of work and different levels of influence that we as a team and our network needs to influence and needs influence from in order to realise our ambitions. So the darker purple towards the centre is representing a real granular community level, right through to the lighter green on the outside, which is at a national level, and the role of the pilot in terms of helping to shape and influence local policy and strategy for the future. Next slide, please, Joe. So at the start of our journey in 2018, we spent some time defining and understanding the system that we're operating within in Doncaster. We worked with Dr. Nick Cavell, who's many of you will know is an expert in systems thinking, systems mapping, and a wide range of stakeholders to identify in Doncaster what helps physical activity, but also what's getting in the way, what are those kind of really stubborn barriers that are preventing residents to move more in their daily lives. And many of you will have seen maps similar to this, or even taken part in similar exercises within your own work. And we just want to kind of really make it clear that our system, just like any other, isn't static and isn't defined only by the nodes that you can see in the map. But for us, it highlights the complexity and the relationship between the various aspects, such as policies, physical infrastructure, cultures, behaviours, beliefs, that all affect physical activity, but are also affected by engagement in physical activity of residents. And we thought it was important to share that with you around the wider context and the complexity of our system in Doncaster. And for us, it's important to be really clear that our systems mapping process is a separate but complementary tool to the social network analysis that we're talking to you about today. Next slide, please, Jo. So the systems mapping process has helped us to identify the actions we might take to reduce inactivity, but it's also helped us to identify the people, groups and organisations who have a role to play in those actions and collectively influence a change in that system that you've just seen. And like a lot of places, Doncaster's got a partnership in place of people, groups and organisations who are working collaboratively in most cases to tackle that. And in its most basic form in Doncaster, we think of it as a collective of 4 interconnected groups, and you can see those on the screen there in the Venn diagram. So just to talk you through that a little bit in a little bit more detail, our partnership is supported at a high level by an advisory board, which is made up of senior representatives from across the public, private, voluntary sectors, like most places will have in place. And the board represents and advocates Get Doncaster Moving at a strategic level. They've got a role in understanding and influencing the dynamics of the physical activity system in Doncaster and brokering and unlocking some of those conversations about inactivity to create new audiences from various sectors who have an influence on behaviours. And then to the right of that, in the green circle, you can see the Get Doncaster Moving team. We're a relatively small team for the size of the borough and the breadth of work that we're undertaking. And we're embedded within the Doncaster Council's Public Health Directorate in the main. We do have some roles that are embedded in other parts and other sectors, and other partners and other sectors, but we can come on to that. And we as a team perform what we refer locally as backbone function. And again, many of you will refer to that language in similar ways, which includes some of the activities that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen in the blue boxes. So the backbone function is essentially aiming to facilitate the conditions for Doncaster's partnership, for Doncaster's network of people, groups and organisations who want to take action or are taking action to address physical inactivity in a more coordinated and collaborative way. So on the whole and universally, we do this as a team through organisation of various network meetings, events, newsletters, the website and other collaborative platforms that connect the whole together or aim to connect the whole together. And then in the dark blue circle, we've got residents, and they play a key role in what we're doing. So our Well Doncaster team, who are part funded by the local delivery pilot, is shared capacity in communities, and they've got an important role in growing and strengthening that network at a community level with residents, groups and organisations. So we've got a member of the team embedded at a community level, and that resident engagement happens through a range of methods such as appreciative inquiry, positive activity groups, active community grants, community-led plans, etc. We just don't have time on the call for me to kind of explain a bit more about those approaches, but just wanted to give you a flavour of how that happens locally through that team. So our aim across the partnership is to distribute leadership and build leadership capacity across the whole partnership. And for us, this means increasing the number of people, groups and organisations who recognise that they've got a role to play within the system, within influencing the system, and increasing the number of people who start to take action in their roles. And then most importantly for us is, while we might want to increase the number of people involved, that doesn't necessarily improve the quality. So it's equally important to increase the or strengthen the connections within the growing partnership. So that's an increased number of connections, increased frequency and increased strength within and between those individual people, groups and organisations in the partnership. So that's why we look towards the social network analysis tool to help us answer some of those questions about how that is changing in our work over the course of the local delivery pilot. So now I'll hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk to you a bit more about the specifics of the social network analysis as an evaluation tool.
Thanks, Jodie. So we just want to start by briefly summarising what social network analysis is. A few of you may be familiar with it, but just in case. So social network analysis allows you to understand how individuals and organisations are connected by mapping the relationships between them, and crucially, how this changes over time. So we can look at the changes in the network over a number of years. So in the context of Doncaster, it is allowing us to see the key partners in the GDM network and partnership and how that has changed over the last few years. So rather than this just being a list of people in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, it allows you to see this visually. So we have an example of an S&A map on this slide. So on the diagram on the right, each dot, so every coloured circle that you can see, is a person in the GDM network and partnership, and each line is a connection or a relationship. So this means you can see who is in the network and who isn't, who is working with who, and it's much easier to see this visually rather than as a long list of names, and you can really visually see who is connecting with who. So at the moment, you're probably looking at this map and thinking, how do I know who anyone is? This probably wouldn't be that useful. So this is an anonymous map. So for data protection, we can't share a map with people's names on it. But on the maps that we share with Get Doncaster Moving, each dot is a named individual and they can see the name on each dot. So it appears in the middle of the dot. So it's much more useful to the GDM team. So it's more than just the visual that you can see on here. Next slide, please, Joan. So we're using S&A as part of the evaluation of Get Doncaster Moving to examine how the GDM network has grown whilst it's been receiving LDP funding. So this allows us to see how it has grown overall, but equally by organisation type. So on the previous map, the different coloured dots meant different types of organisations. So we can see if there's a growth in the voluntary sector, growth in number of people involved from Doncaster Council, so we can look at that in different ways. Also, we can see how strong and frequent the various relationships are, and can also explore what would happen if key individuals left the network. So as an evaluation tool, it's really useful. But I think the most important thing about this is it isn't just an evaluation tool. So the findings from this also inform the work that GDM are doing, as it allows them to understand which individuals are in the network, which organisations they're from, and crucially how they're all working together. It also enables them to see who's missing from the network. So social network analysis, it is just one tool that we're using to look at the growth of the network. It's supported by a partnership survey, depth interviews, attendance at network meetings, reflective learning sessions with the GDM team. So it's not one tool that's used on its own, but collectively they allow us to understand the growth of the network and how it's developing. So how do we actually practically undertake the social network analysis? So we asked GDM network partners and key people in the GDM team to list each person they work with to tackle physical inactivity in Doncaster. So we then asked them for each individual when they started working with them, how they work with them, and how often they work with them. So there's certain drop-down menus that people can select from. And this means we can not only examine who is working together, but equally we can look at how frequently they work together, the depth of that relationship, and also who's new to the network in the last year, so we can see how it's expanded over the last year. Currently, the S&A is embedded in a partnership survey, so it's not just a tool in its own right. So the partnership survey is completed nearly every year by as many people as possible who are involved in the physical activity network in Doncaster. The survey itself covers a range of different questions to examine progress in the network, and it's anchored within a behaviour change model. So we cover aspects such as barriers to tackling inactivity, individuals' own capabilities, their opportunities within their own organisation to tackle physical inactivity, and outcomes and impacts for them. And as part of that, we include questions to allow us to undertake the network analysis itself. So in terms of S&A questions, you could increase the number of questions you ask. So you could find out about different things about those relationships. It's completely up to you, but it does take time for people to complete it. So for individuals who are tackling physically inactivity on a daily basis, they may have over 100 people to list. We have many more for some individuals. So if you think about then another 4 questions for each person, that's over 400 questions they might need to answer, or more if they're tackling physical inactivity with multiple people. So you just need to think carefully about increasing the number of questions you ask about those relationships and really think about how important it is to your analysis. It isn't a quick task to complete, and we work closely with the GDM team to try and encourage completion with partners. So getting a good response rate is important. The S&A map itself is only as good as the data which goes in, but we don't expect to get 100% response rate. That's unrealistic. So we know that the map won't be completely perfect and it won't completely reflect the whole of the GDM network and the partnership, but it still requires a lot of information, still provides a lot of information to both the team and the evaluation. So from a practical perspective, partners get a choice of 2 methods they can use to complete the S&A. So during the survey itself, they can choose to download an Excel template, which they can complete, or they can answer the questions as part of the survey itself. You can see the kind of an extract of 2 of the examples on the screen there. So from our experience so far, the Excel template seems to be more popular, and especially amongst those who have lots of connections. It can be downloaded and saved, so it's something that the person can keep. They can complete it in stages. So for those people who are tackling physical inactivity with a lot of people, it's good to be able to come back to it, go away, think about if everybody's represented on there, do it in stages, really think about who's going in. Equally, it's something that the person can keep themselves once it's complete. So they have a list of all of the individuals they're working with. And for some people, they've said that it's actually a really useful exercise for them to complete it themselves, because it's really making them sit down and think, who do I actually work with? Who am I tackling physical inactivity with? And it allows them sometimes to think about who is missing from my own relationships, never mind the GDM network in its entirety. So the online survey is more popular for those who only have a small number of connections and they want to complete it at the same time of the survey. So it's something that if someone's just got a few connections, they can complete it really quickly, and it's kind of streamlined as part of the survey. So there's kind of pros and cons of each, and you could use either, you could use both. So to make the social network analysis a success, I think one of the most important things is we work really closely with the GDM team. We are external evaluators, but we recognise that we need to work really closely with the GDM team to make this a success. So as I mentioned earlier, the GDM team are critical in encouraging partners to complete the S&A as members of the network. It isn't a 5-minute task to complete it unless you're only engaging with 1 or 2 people. And I think we need to be honest about that. It does take time. So the established relationships that the GDM team have with network partners is really important, because it means they can encourage completion, really sell kind of why we're doing it, what we want to get out of it. And we also work with the GDM team to decide what analysis to run. So once we have the data, there's lots of different things we can do with the data that sits behind those network maps. And we want to make sure that we don't only run what's useful for the evaluation, but actually there's lots of useful information that we can provide the GDM team through the maps. So we decide that analysis collectively. So for example, for the 2023 network analysis that we're currently in the process of running, so we couldn't share any visuals from that today, unfortunately, we're actually creating an organisational level S&A alongside the individual one. So at the moment, the map that we showed near the start was individual people. So organisations could appear multiple times if different people from that organisation are in the network. But because they can be spread across the network map, it sometimes can be tricky to actually work out which organisations are working together. So we're going to use the data that sits behind that and create an organisational level one, where each dot on the network map will be an organisation, and you can see how the individual organisations link together. So once the data has actually been collected, there's quite a lot of work that kind of goes on behind the scenes to clean the data. It's not the most exciting task, it takes a bit of time. but key things such as standardizing how people have spelled names. Understandably, people misspell people's names all the time, and if we don't standardize that, they'll appear multiple times in the map. Equally, organization names, again, they need to be standardized how they appear. Equally, things like coding the organization types. So rather than asking an individual to say what someone's organization type is, that would add another question, which is, say, maybe another 100 questions. We code that behind the scenes. So as evaluators, we can do a lot of that ourselves. We can go through and clean the data and standardize it. But the GDM team are a lot closer to who the individuals actually are. So they can spot things which aren't obvious to us, such as if somebody's got a similar name. So if you've, say, got an Elizabeth and a Liz with the same surname, the GDM team are likely to know whether or not that's the same person, or actually it could be two different people. The same with if people are listed under the wrong organisations. So we can just make sure that the data is a lot more accurate and people are appearing correctly in the SNA. And I think finally, once the maps are developed, we can interpret the data together. They know who the key players in the network are. They know who the names are. And they equally know what the implications of this are for them as a partnership. And I think the key thing to take away from here is that if you as organisations decided to ask for external help to do an SNA, I think the quality of the data and the maps which are produced will be much more enhanced and much more accurate if you work collaboratively with that external partner. They can do a lot themselves, but actually they do need support from individuals and local people in the area. So we just wanted to share a few findings with you today from the SNA. So as I mentioned earlier, we're just in the process of processing the latest data. So unfortunately, we can't show the 2023 maps. But what we have here is how the network has developed in Doncaster from 2018 to 2021. And you can visually see the number of connections and how the shape of the network is changing. The network was much smaller in 2018 and has steadily grown over the last few years with the work that the LDP and the GDM team have been doing. And actually, when you look at the number of people who responded to the SNA, it was almost the same number of people who completed the SNA when they're responding in 2018, 2019, 2020 and 2021. It's just that the number of people they're working with has grown considerably. So whilst these maps look relatively simple and they show the growth of the network quite well, there's actually a lot of other analysis you can do behind the scenes to explore different working assumptions and things that you want to know about your network. So for example, you can create a map which shows just the connections in the health and care sector. So Jodie earlier showed you the diagram with the 8 delivery themes. If you want to understand what the network is like in certain delivery themes, you could just pull out the data from that delivery theme if you're able to code that up. Equally, you could look at the connections which are linked to an individual. So you could see how critical a certain individual is. So as you can see from, I suppose, the one at the bottom, you can see there's certain individuals there who have a high number of connections to other individuals in the network. And one of the things you can understand about that is if for some reason that individual left the network, a lot of connections could be lost if you don't bring them into the network and collaborate with other people. Equally, you can look at the sustainability of the network. So there are many opportunities to cut the data in various ways for both the evaluation and to assist those in the network. And that's from an evaluation perspective and I suppose from a GDM network perspective in terms of them understanding the data. Also behind the maps is the raw data that as statisticians we can run additional analysis on and kind of produce some frequencies and numbers. So this slide shows the frequency and strength of connections and how that has changed between 2019 and 2021. And what we can see is that alongside the network growing, which you could really nicely see in those actual visuals in terms of the maps, the proportion of relationships that are based on collective decision making to tackle physical inactivity have actually grown and the informal relationships have reduced. So you may expect as the number of connections grow in a network that initially some of those relationships may be quite informal or they may be just quite ad hoc or not, the engagement may not be that frequent. But actually what we can see from this work is that the opposite has happened and that although lots of new people have joined the network, equally the strength and frequency of those relationships has increased. So I'm going to hand back to Jodie now, who's going to talk a little bit about how they're using the SNA in their work.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I think you might have covered some of the points, but just in more detail, and before we go into the breakout sessions, I just wanted to kind of summarize really around the broader use that this has beyond the evaluation tool. So of course, the first bullet point on the screen is around, strengthening our understanding of what is changing in terms of the partnerships in Doncaster, and the how and why is supported by our partnership survey and more deeper work that we do with specific partners to kind of nurture those relationships moving forward. And then the three other bullets really around how it informs our planning and our future work. So the first point really is around it tailoring our universal engagement and how we as a team support, either hold space with partners or support other partners to hold space with each other. And by that we mean specific spaces for collaboration, whether it's meetings, events, etc., that focus on specific issues that bring a set of partners together that might need that wider support and space to connect together and strengthen those relationships, and focusing on specific actions either within the Get Doncaster Moving strategy or more specific to their areas of work. The other point is around strengthening connections within network themes. So Sarah spoke about the health sector, which is an emerging piece of work for us, and many people on the call will relate to. It's quite a complex system to understand, to navigate. So as a specific area of work, we will be using this over the next couple of years to understand who we're connecting with across the network and the partnerships, specifically around health and care, to look at where those advocates are within the health and care system for our work and for our physical activity. And the final point really is around helping us identify specific capacity building opportunities. So where we might identify individuals or groups of individuals within the network and within the partnership who have a number of connections, a high number of connections, or a strong set of connections, we can see the people who have that strong influence on the network. So supporting them to maintain their role as the Get Doncaster Moving influencers, the storytellers, working with them to strengthen and grow their capacity further to influence the network, but also to identify those individuals who might have only one or two connections, but indirectly could potentially connect to others. So how we might build individual capacities, individual leadership capacities, with more focused specific work with the individuals that are highlighted through this approach. I'm conscious that I've kind of rushed through that, so happy to kind of take any further questions later on. So I guess moving on, we're really keen for people to keep in touch with either this piece of work or what we're doing. So there's some contact details, and social media details on the screen, and we'll have to share our email addresses after this session with you. So please do get in touch with any further questions if they're not answered today. So moving on then, really, so we've got about 5 or 10 minutes, I believe, in breakout rooms, and we've put a couple of questions on there for you to consider and discuss, but happy for you to use that space as you feel, really, to reflect on the tool, discuss or consider how you might use this in your work, some of the strengths that it might bring, but also some of the challenges that you might also see. But consider what questions you might have in your work, in your place, in your organisation, about your network of partners who you work with, and what questions might it help you answer. And as I said, if you feel like you'd like to use that space differently, again, we're happy with that, and we'll come back together in about, is that 10 minutes, Ollie?
Yeah, I believe so. I wasn't. Yeah.
Sorry, we'll come back together in about 10 minutes, and we'll be open to sharing, for you to share your discussions. So I think Joe's moving you all into groups now, is that right?
Yeah, I can see the numbers going down, so it's working.